21st meeting of the Planning Commission. This meeting is now in session. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May we have the roll call, please, Kate?
Sure. Gary Cunningham.
Here.
Patty Crowan.
Here.
Doug Bryson.
Here.
Marie McFarland.
Here.
Sean Keir.
Here.
Miles Schlesinger.
Here.
Steve Griffiths.
Here. Do we have any agenda changes or revisions?
No, we don't.
We don't. Okay. Have we all had the opportunity to read the minutes for our July 17th meeting? Is there a motion to approve or any comments on the minutes first?
I move we approve the minutes for the July 17th meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. I don't think we'll have any public comments on non-agenda items tonight. There are no final orders or resolutions, no public hearing or deliberations, but we do have some old business, and that is the Coastal Resiliency Plan update. And
I can start with that.
that will be coming from,
Well, I'll start, and basically what I'm going to do is, as an introduction, just kind of read through this short memo that I had in your packets. And then Mark Nicholson, our Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, will take over from there. So 2 weeks ago, we had a community night out at Curtis Park, and instead of having a regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting, we went to community night out, and I believe there were five of us there, and we, you and staff, planning staff, and Mark were all on hand to talk about emergency preparedness and tsunami preparedness with the people who were there. We had a questionnaire, and we got 75 responses on the questionnaire. We went up and approached people, and the commissioners did an outstanding job of that. And so Mark is going to be going through a tabulation of the results, and we'll just see what people said and how prepared they are and what they would like the city be doing to prepare for a tsunami event. We entered names of all those who filled out our questionnaire, and the person who won the $75 value emergency to-go kit was Cheryl Knight, who works at the community center. So the to-go kit was a great demonstration tool during the event. In other Coastal Resiliency Project news, staff met with Laura Gable, Oregon's Department of Geology and Mineral Industry staff, who will be doing our Beat the Wave analysis. And she turned us on to a PowerPoint that shows some work that was done by an engineering class at the U.S. Naval Academy. And we are going to share that, even though we're not, we don't have the expertise to explain it or to evaluate it. It is kind of interesting to see that someone had selected Cutler City as a class project and worked through the process of what it would take to build a vertical evacuation structure there. So that's kind of interesting. So I'll turn that over to Mark, and he can take us through the tabulation results.
Good evening.
good evening.
First, well, I don't know if disclaimer is the right word, but maybe a couple comments about this survey. We we didn't at the time, and we don't now pretend that this was a real scientific survey. It was just to get a feel for what people were thinking, and I think it worked quite well for that purpose. We expect in the future, especially when there are options, serious options with budgetary consequences or whatever consequences, that we would have more sophisticated questionnaire or questionnaires, surveys. Anyway, this is a starting point. Let me get to page 1. I will just summarize the questions. I don't plan on reading every word, and a couple comments that I had just in sort of putting these results together, and then we'll see. You might have had different comments yourself. The first question was, we would think the simplest was, what neighborhood do you live in? We had, and I don't know the exact number, but there were about 10 people that were outside of the city. Most I guess 18. Most were in the city. Ocean Lake was well represented because probably that's where the event was being held. But it's a pretty representative group across the city, which I think is good for the results. There were a total of 75. Thanks to all of your hard work. The first real question was, is your house in the evacuation area? The second part of that wasn't always responded to, but if it is in the tsunami evacuation area, are you able to, by foot, get to safety within 15 to 20 minutes, i.e., before the tsunami wave would arrive, following an earthquake? And as I said, people responded to the first, are you in the evacuation zone, didn't necessarily respond to the second. One thing that I noticed is out of the 75, there were only 5 people who said they didn't know or didn't answer. And again, some of these people are from up and down the coast, so it doesn't mean that that they're local and didn't know. So I was pretty impressed that people thought they knew anyway. I'm assuming they had the right answer. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. At least for that.
Well, that
part.
speaks a lot to the city's outreach efforts, I think, and education.
Well, it's the city, it's the New Yorker, it's OPB. There've been a lot of things happening over the past few years that I think are finally raising awareness. That doesn't mean people knowing that. We still had a number of people that would make the offhanded comment, yeah, I am, but I don't do anything about it. So it doesn't mean that we're as prepared as we should be, but at least there seems to be an awareness. Again, the second part of that was, if you're in the zone, are you able to evacuate in a timely manner? 11 people said yes. Most didn't answer, and I don't know if they didn't answer because they didn't know. Some people said they didn't know, or they just didn't answer. I think it was the nature of the structure of the questions. Those follow-on questions don't frequently get answered very thoroughly. And that's one that this is an example of one that we would want to flesh out both in people's perception and in actual exercises.
Beat the Wave will help do that, yeah.
The Beat the Wave analysis will help with the modeling, and then we could do some real ground truthing as well to confirm that.
So 48 people said they were not in the zone, and so that makes sense that they didn't say yes.
Right.
So that they may be a lot of the ones who didn't answer.
Right. But again, that's something that'll be a focus of the Beat the Wave and other analyses. That's one of the critical parts, is if they're in that zone, are they able to get out? And then the converse, how many people will not be able to get out? either, because of, for whatever reason, how many people will not, and then what action, is there any action that we can take to reduce the number that won't get out? And again, that's the beat the wave is critical in that, as our other analyses. What's the likelihood of a tsunami happening in your lifetime? I was surprised that, people felt it was pretty likely. And in fact, the numbers are higher than, than the percentages that the experts throw out as far as likelihood over the next 50 years. There are a lot of people that said 50% and higher. So I think that goes to the awareness thing, and I think it's fine if people think it's higher. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But I was kind of surprised by it.
Well, I found it was also age-related. Some older people said, nah, not in my lifetime, and then
Right.
a woman said, I plan to live a long time, so yeah.
I think maybe asking, what's the likelihood over the next X years,
Yeah,
so you can't cop out just because you're 70,
right.
and say, no, it's
6.
not going to happen to me,
Right.
or whatever. So I sort of randomly, you can kind of tell, some people gave a percentage, some said things like, good, yes, probable, every day is closer, likely, very possible, fairly high, et cetera, et cetera. So I just arbitrarily kind of lumped these in the way, in an increasing likelihood. A couple of people said 100%. They didn't say you betcha, I did. But, so I thought that was interesting if the numbers were a little higher. We asked, how would you like the city to prepare? And there's a list of, what are there, 7 or 8 options. Without more information, some of these are very hard to respond to, and we understand that. And there was definitely, when you talk about things like a buyout program or vertical evacuation, unless you provide some context and some boundaries, that could mean a lot, or it could be tens of millions of dollars or something else, but people didn't tend to know. The same with land use limitations. I think people might agree in principle, but they're always hesitant to say, yes, there should be a lot more regulations unless they know specifically what you're proposing. But having said that, in general, there were, quite a few people. A yes to me, if nothing else, means, I think it's worth looking at, even if you don't know all the specifics. And again, on the right-hand side, you can see the actual comments that were there. In addition to saying yes, a lot of times people added another comment.
What does the no high density mean?
Probably no apartment buildings in tsunami zones?
It was, sometimes people would say yes or no and then qualify it. Like a few said yes, but they would underline or circle schools and hospitals. And I think the high density is kind of the same. Not in general, but yes for the high density
Restricting high density
areas.
Does anybody remember getting that comment?
It could have been mine, I don't remember specifically, but I would interpret that as meaning we should not allow high density in the tsunami zone.
It could, yeah. But that's what that is what it's, that's literally what it said. Some of these are not very easy to tell exactly. So land use limitations, people were, it wasn't it was just, I think, I got the sense for the few of the comments that a little more information probably, which makes sense. Improve the infrastructure, that's my shorthand, but it was talking about strengthening roads and bridges and that type of infrastructure, but, to me, that would apply to water systems or what other mitigation standards. There tended to be pretty good support. Some people saying it's not possible, or one person at least said it's not possible if we have a 9 magnitude earthquake, but I'm not sure that's the position we should adopt. Because it may not be a 9.x, it may be an 8.2. I mean, it may be something that doesn't just wipe out the city, but creates enough damage that we do want to respond. So I think we have to assume that we can do something. Vertical evacuation, again, this is one that was. We'll talk in the PowerPoint a little bit about vertical evacuation, but there was kind of a few people made comments to the effect that if you have a vertical evacuation structure, it's going to cause a log jam of people. There's going to be a rush. I think they have a perception that that's a tower, and typically that's not what people propose. It's like the roof of a school building or the Hatfield Marine Studies Center. It's the roof of a functioning structure, so it's quite a quite large area. It's not a bunch of people trying to climb up this narrowing point. I mean, there's kind of a sense with some of the responses that's what too many people rushing to the same spot, et cetera. Yeah, a few people know because of the money, which is understandable, even though we didn't specify any figures. Buyout program, I think kind of the same. I don't know. I'm not sure this is something that a lot of people really thought much about, and also it's such an unknown. If you presented to people the idea that you were going to buy everything in an area, in all the risky areas, and move that's a hugely expensive prospect. So if that's what people were thinking, that's probably where the no came from. But I think there was definitely some interest. And again, we didn't provide any estimate of budgetary impact. Outreach and education, yes, keep doing it. Do more. Caches, there's quite a large number that said yes, but there was a theme that came up in a number of questions of neighborhood and individual responsibility, and not just making an assumption that the city would do everything or pay everything. Part of the question about caches was, should they be neighborhood funded or should they be city funded? And on the city side, a lot of the answers were yes, partially, yes, some, yes, but not yes 100%.
I think the people I spoke to thought, right, not yes 100%. It's something that should be shared. We could do some of it, and the city can do some of it, particularly when it comes to covering tourists. They were saying there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly so that a community, if you say it's a neighborhood responsibility, that and you have a lot of VRDs in the neighborhood, then that's got to be mitigated somehow, and probably the city would have to help out.
Or the owners, yeah.
Well, and the owner, not or, but I think and the owners of VRDs, but there has to be some mechanism for that to happen. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but yes, it should be, everyone should chip in basically, and ideally there'd be some way to figure out, how much makes sense.
And there'll be a lot of people in town who are not staying in a VRD, but they are visiting. They're just passing through.
Right.
Or there's a
Yeah.
special event that day or something. Yeah.
Well, especially like we've seen in the past, week or so, with it being not very pleasant in the valley. We get, there's an awful lot of day trippers, I think. Other ideas, these are kind of all over, but one thing that came up repeatedly was neighborhood involvement, neighborhood awareness. Neighbors caching, if that's a verb, caching other neighbors. In other words, someone that lives on high ground, opening up a corner of their garage to have people that live further down store things. But a lot of, or quite a number of comments about neighbor involvement. Financial assistance, the comment came up a few times, it's expensive. I don't think that's 100%. I think people perceive it's maybe more expensive than it needs to be, but anyway, the perception that it's expensive, and wondering if there couldn't be some sort of financial assistance program to encourage people, either go kits or more than that. Yeah, hot air balloons.
Go to moms?
I don't know if that's an open invitation, but that's all we know.
What's for dinner?
I think in any emergency, that's always, that's always a good approach, probably. Do people worry about other hazards, and if so, what can or should the city do about it? A lot said yes, they do, and I think it's what you'd expect: quakes, fires, windstorms. I mean, the things that we think about or encounter. I'm guessing the fire number has gone up over the years. I think when I first came in 2000, I don't think people were too worried about wildfires on the coast. I think that's changed. Asteroids. It covers the landslides. Ticks. I mean, if you're worried about them, they're fair game. What can the city do? There wasn't too much, again, financial assistance. I believe the city is preparing as best it can.
There is some truth to the ticks, though. I mean, they are moving out here.
Well, and it is a concern. I mean, especially if you are out in the woods. Yeah. Well, I know all these things, falling trees even, I think, flood. I mean, they're all, someone's concerned. Whether we can do anything about it's another question. So that's that. Any
That's fun.
questions? I think it was a good exercise, and like I said, I think we will want to, when we start getting in this process, some recommendations where we can provide a bit more information. I think seeing what people's priorities are and all that will be of value. And I think especially after the presentation of the beat the wave information, because that may change some attitudes, I'm guessing, in some of the more vulnerable areas. They're pretty stark. I think we saw some little examples of that when Meg did the presentation, but it's a pretty stark thing. Like if you're in this zone, even if you are a sprinter, you're not going to make it. And that's not so much true in Lincoln City. Seaside, it's definitely the case. But anyway, so I think after those are presented, then I think that's probably a good time to try to drill down a bit on what people are thinking, what they're aware of, and even the recommendations.
Well, and I think that just getting people to start thinking about it, is part of the value of this exercise.
Yeah.
Because some of the folks that I approached hadn't even thought about it. So
Right.
you can get people to just get it in their head, and then when the more information comes out from the city, they're sort of primed for it.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah.
I enjoyed doing it. It was a useful exercise, and I think people liked most of the ideas that came up. Some of them took a second thought and said, ooh, that's going to cost money. Maybe not. But they liked the ideas. Yeah.
But that's, like I said, it's hard to, it's going to cost money, but we weren't presenting any budgets, so.
Right.
Yeah. I think the tiger was the one that was concerned about the ticks, actually. It's just a guess.
It could be.
Mark, I had a question because I noticed that the tsunami warning signs on the roads have been moved higher up the hill. at least in front of my house, and I was wondering,
Which ones?
well, this one is.
You're not talking about the in-street blue lines?
Yes. Yes, the new blue line had been approximately 8 feet down the hill slope from my house, and now it's right in front of my house. And so it seems like it's moved 8 feet higher up, and I was wondering, is that some kind of a forecast that we got?
Was there street work or anything?
I mean,
Well, was there work on the street in front of your?
no, they just put in a really nice new blue sign that says you're leaving the evacuation zone.
That happened in front of my house as well.
And it had been down the hill
Different
towards,
higher.
yeah, about a 6.
So are you talking about the blue line that is put on the
Painted
pavement?
on the road, and the signs that are sticking out.
And it
of the ground.
moved?
It moved up the hill since I moved there.
Okay, we have something else to worry about.
They're not supposed to be animate.
Yeah, there's,
Well, no, what I'm saying is the previous marking had been down the hill quite a bit,
Oh.
and they
That's
put
an
a
old
brand
mark.
new
Yeah,
one
it's
out.
not moving by itself. Somebody repainted it higher.
Well, there was there a marker that said evacuation route or something?
Right.
And
No,
now,
zone. You'd like safe zone. Okay? Where I live on, it's 12th North, and it had been down the hill closer to the ocean and lower elevation, and then about
2 weeks ago?
I think it was more like about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they put a brand new one on, and they put it up the hill 8 feet in front of
You
my
can
house.
give me the addresses.
okay,
But
but,
Well,
I'm not aware that.
Mark-
I
they-
was just wondering if there was some
Yeah, they
common
moved.
knowledge that they've raised.
Moved in front of my house on Southeast
Expectation.
23rd and 101.
Mark, when did they install those?
Oh, gosh.
The original ones or the second one?
Some were at the end of last year, they started installing them, and finished about April.
It's a really
But
pretty
there's
sign.
still a handful. The reason I asked about, there's still a handful. There's a couple in Rhodes End, one by the casino. There's a few that are just now going in because there was work being done resurfacing on the roads. That's why I asked.
Well, no, ours
Not
hasn't
where
been
my house is.
resurfaced.
Huh.
And, you know.
No, I don't
Most of
know.
it, but
The,
not-
the
not
tourists
that.
walk over the line, you know, and then they take pictures of it right on the road because there's like, oh, now we're safe. Now we're not. Now we're safe. Now we're not. You know? And, you know, I was just
Do you play
wondering.
the same game in your house?
No,
Well, I was wondering about my insurance company.
I'll find out. I'm not really aware of that. I mean, the reason for doing that would be if it was put in the wrong place in the first time, but
I assume it's an elevation.
yeah, it's basically Sandy,
Yes, yeah.
the GIS person, is using the inundation maps, I mean, the digital version of those maps, and literally finding where that crosses a road and then adding, putting them
Maybe they forgot to put that on there, and they're doing that
a
now.
little bit
maps are
higher.
Mine was there.
The maps are updated recently,
Further
right?
up the road.
Interesting.
Well, I just assumed that we just, because it's been a little bit longer since the quake, that now there's more energy and now there's more likelihood of a higher.
No, I don't think that's changed. The modeling hasn't changed. The only reason I could think, but we didn't, is that if they were just put in the wrong place. I mean, they were marked, and if they somehow got laid down in the wrong location, they would have been.
are there now 2 stripes in front of you,
Oh,
on
no,
your
they
street?
They took up the old stripe, in my case, it had been down on the, I live right on top of a hill, and it had been maybe more than 8 feet down the slope towards the ocean.
How long had the old stripe been there?
It was
Years?
almost wore out.
Yeah.
So maybe just the GPS resolution has
Yeah.
gotten better and now
Yeah,
it's more
well,
accurate.
like I said, they brought a brand new one out, ironed it on,
Yeah.
It's now right in front of my house. So
Okay.
I get to watch the tourists.
Before, because we didn't really have stripes before, we had the circular,
Yeah,
is that what you're talking about?
yeah, that is all wore out.
Ah, okay.
Now they got a stripe right,
The circular ones weren't really tied with leaving or not. They were just directional, I think. I think most of them.
They just had an arrow in them, but
And they just had an arrow, but they weren't tied with that point where the inundation crosses the road. The new ones, the blue lines, are a little bit above, like maybe 10 feet above the point where those cross. So there's a little bit of a, if that makes
10-foot
sense.
elevation sounds like maybe where it was 10
Yeah.
foot down the hill before.
Yeah, but we'll check it
okay.
out.
I'm
We'll
okay.
take a look.
Mark, I have a question. Are you putting those signs on every east-west road, or are you painting a stripe on every?
No, I mean, eventually, if people think it's, one of the things, we got a certain number of them and spread those out, and that's about 30 total. And I don't know how many east-west, there's many more than that. One of the things that, and this is all through the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, DOGAMI, they have, or Oregon Emergency Management as well, they have talked about providing us with a stencil, I guess is the word, so that we could paint our own that wouldn't be quite as expensive as these thermoplastic things that you have to torch down and all that. And then we'd have the freedom to put them everywhere, and also we could put them on a road even though we know it's going to get torn up in a year or two, whereas now we held off on those until the work was completed in a few locations. So possibly, it's, it's just, there's a lot of streets. There's a lot of those streets. Some, there, if you eliminate some, there's not, it's hard to argue there's really a need, because there's no inundation right on the coast. But definitely in areas where it kind of fingers in a bit, we want people to know. So
Well, I think what you see, as you drive around town, you see them at various points, and I think for myself, I'm getting a good sense of, okay, I'm out of the zone or I'm in the zone, just
Right.
by constantly being reminded of this by driving around the city.
I was asked one day about height. In other words, if I'm 100 feet above the ocean, if my GPS says I'm 100 feet, am I safe?
well,
Is there a height that's,
the nature of this, the new evacuation maps, I mean, some of you might remember there were some old maps in the 90s, and those pretty much just took a contour, I can't remember exactly what, 50 feet, let's say, and just ran that through town and said, this is the line, above this is good, below it. The current maps are based on an actual model, so it changes from place to place. In other words, there's no magic number. And in some areas on the map, I think I have these maps. I think you know what I'm talking about. But on these maps, if you look along the yellow inundation line, there are some elevation numbers, 47, 52, 22, and they're different. They're quite different. So it depends on the run-up of the water, and it's a model. It's no longer an elevation. Yeah, so there's really no good answer to that. I mean, higher is better, I think, maybe is the answer, but
I think the good answer is look online and find the maps, or come in and get a map, look at a map here at the City Hall. And because everybody should know.
But I think as Steve mentioned, it's not enough to know where your house is. You need to know what City Hall is, what the schools are, maybe, where you work. In other words, where do you spend your time? And that's where having these things spread around kind of gets a sense of, oh, wow, when I'm here, I'm okay, or I'm not, or, depending on.
Deborah, you mentioned the maps. Are they being sent to the VRDs to put in their VRDs?
They're required to be posted in the VRDs.
They are to be posted?
Yes.
Well,
And, yeah.
thank you, Mark. Any further questions?
Should we move on?
Sure.
Okay. Now we'll get into the real science. Just kidding. as Deb mentioned, just coincidentally, as we were talking to Laura of Dogami Geology Mineral Industries and Meg Reed, who did a presentation here, a while back from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, as we were talking to them about different aspects of this project, they mentioned that, oh, by the way, were you aware that this Naval Academy engineering class did a study, a vertical evacuation study of Color City, when none of us were aware. I don't know that they physically came here. We kind of imagine it's a desk study, I'm thinking. I don't think they physically made the trip here to look, and how they picked, we don't know. Deb's sent a message to the lead engineer kind of asking, how'd you pick Color City from the East Coast? So we don't really know that. But it's interesting all the same, and it kind of gives a sense of the considerations. Again, it's not a recommendation for this as a solution, but it kind of gives a sense of how they would approach it, and so since we have it, it's kind of interesting for that reason. Yeah, so this is apparently 485M. I don't think we get credit for just doing this, though. Okay, the problem: tsunami, Lincoln City, Cascadia subduction zone. We're also not sure how they decided, if that's the problem, I think the reason they chose vertical evacuation as the solution is because it's an engineering class. So they wanted to look at that specifically. I don't think they did a big study and evaluated other options and that type of thing. I wouldn't expect. But that's fine. It's still
Their building design might be interesting, though.
Of interest. Yeah, I think it's still of interest. Yeah, one of the main, this isn't bad anyway as a statement. Design a reinforced concrete building, Lincoln City, Oregon, to provide for vertical evacuation in a tsunami while providing for other public uses during normal times. And I think that's key, the multi-use, if this were ever to be a recommendation, and if it ever moved beyond that point, I think to justify it, it probably has to be a multiple use. Again, we talked a little bit about, I'll show a photo of the Marine Hatfield, or the Hatfield Marine Studies Center in Newport. That's very much, I mean, it's the Marine Studies program first, and the only thing that makes it, well, there's some construction issues, but makes it a vertical evacuation is the big ramp leading up and the roof, and I'm sure they've had to take that into account when they built the structure. But that's very much a multiple use. And I think that's the norm, on top of a school, et cetera, not a standalone kind of thing in most places anyway. Yep, Color City. So these are just what they provide. Ocosta Elementary, Ocosta's in Washington, I think. Or is it in Oregon? I think Washington. Anyway, it's basically on the roof of one part of the school. Long Beach, I think this one is, I think Ocosta's built and Long Beach is underway, I believe. Again, ramps to get up or stairs. Some are just earthen mounds. The Safe Haven Hill is not really exactly the same in Newport, but it's an earthen mound. And this, I think, is maybe more what people were concerned about when they talked about the rush to a single point. You know, a tower that looks like people are going to be jostling to get to the top. Most of the designs I've seen are much more open than that, with the idea being you could have a lot of people and you want to, we can look at the Hatfield in a minute. These are just so what they imagine the requirements would be from their client, their virtual client. Tsunami resistant, accessibility, certain number of people effectively located. That is, it doesn't make any sense to build a structure that people still can't get to. So it's got to be, and somewhere they talk about that. Multi-use, cost efficient, of course. Anyway, they're just the factors that they looked at in coming up with their design. Must be multi-purpose. There are specific codes. FEMA has specific codes about building virtual evacuation structures. There's a whole big fat document on it.
Does FEMA have restrictions on what the multi-uses could be for such a structure?
I don't know that there are. I'm not sure there would be. I think the emphasis would be if it's going to have another, whether it's going to have another use or not, is make sure it's high enough that it's the engineering specifications, I guess. I think they definitely have a lot of that information. And I think they would evaluate it, and these are expensive enough that the only way people are going to do it is if they get money from someone like FEMA, so they would review it, Whether the use, I don't know about whether, because some of these a lot of these are schools. So I don't know, there's hardly a more sensitive use. They estimated, I don't know where they got their number, they estimated 750 people. I think the number of people that would actually seek out or use or need the structure, because a lot of people would just leave. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily go to a structure probably. But anyway, those are the kind of things that need to be fleshed out if anyone's going to do something. They assume that they have a 1/5 of a mile radius. I don't know, what drive. I mean, I see the numbers, but I don't know if that's would be a common thing in other vertical evacuations. It's a little bit unusual well, some of them, I think, have a pretty tight radius. It's a little bit harder to think about a whole. Even Cutler City is not huge, but it's still a pretty big area.
Well, and the closer you are to the existing body of water, the less time you have.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think it would almost be more of a gradation moving away from that, so that the people in this particular photo on the right side are going to have a little bit more time than the people on the left side.
I think where the assembly area is, and I don't remember which projection, I think this was Dogami, projected it would be about 24 minutes for the wave, and on the coast it'd be like 18 or something. I mean, it seems like it moves like that, but there was a bit of a span.
So that's kind of running or jogging to the evacuation site at a 12-minute mile pace, sort of. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the analysis, the Dogami preliminary, that's one of the reasons that Laura is kind of starting with Cutler City, is she's already done some of the background work, but some of that preliminary work, she thought, she was referring to the color coding, but that a walk or slow walk would be sufficient for most people to get out. That's kind of the way they categorize it. Whereas like I mentioned, there's areas in Seaside that it's a Usain Bolt sprint and you still couldn't get out. So, in better shape than that. One of the questions we asked, this is their slide, is whether they've done this anywhere else. They mentioned Warrenton. I don't know if they did more, and I don't know if the Lincoln City is just redundant or if they looked at other areas, but hopefully we'll be able to get in contact with them to see. Yeah, we're not going to spend a lot of time.
So we don't have the actual results of this class exercise?
Well,
This
we have
is all we
this.
have.
We have a PowerPoint. We have this PowerPoint. We haven't been in contact with them because maybe it's summer. Maybe it's because it's summer. The professor hasn't responded. So, we don't.
He might be in Cutler City.
Well, that's what
Yeah,
we kind
he's
of.
probably
that's what we
vacationing in
said.
Cutler City.
So we're not going to try to get into the engineering of this, but, this is, whoops. Oh, that's okay. I don't think we need to look at that. One of the things that is interesting here is there is a site that you probably can't see down here. That's the Association of Civil Engineers site. This is their map. It's the analysis they do. And each one of those little triangles, they give the latitude, longitude, but then they give the run-up elevation from however they're coming up with that, and they give the amount of earthquake-caused subsidence, and it tends to be 5 to 6 feet on most of the ones I've looked at. But that's provided by the civil engineers, and they have other information as well. Like, for example, a different symbol, when you look at Salishan Spit, they actually give the number for, inundation. How far underwater that will be, and it's like 20 or 30 feet. But anyway, it's interesting that they've got a pretty robust site. Here, it's just this one slide.
Mark, is the PowerPoint available to us?
As far as I'm,
Sure, we can share that with you. This is almost the entire thing. We took out some slides that were deep into the engineering and would not show up well on our our screen. So, but yeah, if you'd like to have a copy to look at in detail, you're welcome to let me know and I'll send it to you.
hopefully we will hear from the professor and get the actual report, because there probably is a textual report that goes with this.
And I also, asked in my email how confident he was that, these results, in the study, and whether he thought it was done well and of value. So hopefully I'll be able to share that later.
Yeah, it seems like we should be able to get more information. And that would, if they're following up, I think a slide that we deleted at the end talked about the next trip or the trip.
Yeah, they were planning their
to
trip to Cutler City.
And how much it would cost. So they were fishing for money apparently to do the trip. But if they maintain interest, then it would be in their interest to work with us, I would think.
So what is that, that image on the right?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's the QGIS, Quantum Geographic Information. I don't know.
Uh-huh. I read that part, but I'm wondering. what-
No, I don't know.
You can see that the
doesn't-
spit's showing.
but
This is
nothing-
what's going to be underwater.
Nothing indicates what that cross-section is about, or,
That's underwater.
Yeah.
The cross-section, I think the next slide, they talk about the wave elevation and I think they're moving along that line, probably. So I believe that could be that. This, I don't know, this is out of I don't know. But hopefully we can find out. Yeah, like this water level versus distance. I'm guessing that's along that transect that they laid out over there, or similar to it. So it's, about 20 feet That is, there'd be 20 feet of water over the land in a lot of areas that are closer, and then obviously diminishes with distance, as you would expect. But still, I mean, even out in 6,000 feet, it's still 5 feet or something, so.
Sure.
And then this one is just the first section, just blown up in effect, from zero being the shore, or mean high tide, or whatever that is, into about 900 feet. And again, I think the distance is pretty consistent over that period of time. It doesn't diminish, so it has to play out a bit before we get down.
And their location they picked for the vertical evacuation structure was at about that 900 feet, the one with the vertical bar there, yeah.
I think that's the significance of this 900, is this, when they, and the next slide, or one of the next slides, when they talk about the structure and how high it needs to be, they're taking into account this, which I think is about 14 feet, the inundation at that
Point. Right.
line. So elevation, again, I think it's at that point, 914 feet inland, which is what the line was. The natural elevation, 12 feet. The inundation depth, 14, and flow velocity, for those of you that speak flow velocity. Sounds like a lot.
That's feet per
It
second,
sounds like a big number.
20 feet per
This-
second.
This may be a stupid question, but do they calculate what the return flow is going to be? Could that be even greater than the?
Well, I think they have to do, I think they have to have multiple, I would imagine, multiple calculations. Like the first one, there are multiple waves, right? There's no single big wave there. So you've got to figure that impact. They pile up and come out, and that's a huge force coming the other direction. I think it's a tough engineering job.
So it's force coming from all directions, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a stagnant flood, just that you get by a river rising, where it's just, water. So this is ground level down here, natural ground level, 14 feet of inundation, and I don't know if this is a standard thing or something. So they've got a multiplier of 1.3, and they add 10 feet to it to get the elevation that they think they need. But anyway, whatever that calculation is, there's a pretty serious calculation that goes into that to figure out. And if you remember seeing some of the footage from the Japanese tsunami, there was one scene that was played over and over where people were in fact on the vertical evacuation structure and they got swept off. So their calculation was not right. So anything here after that that's going to be done, there's going to be a lot of attention paid to the absolute worst case. And it's not, it's not going to be, well, that'll block my view. Can we lower it a few feet? I don't think it's going to work, I hope. Anyway, this is just their way of doing it, so I think it's of interest. Structural design, so they, thought through that, and that, again, makes more sense to some people than it does to me. This is what they're imagining, and I don't think they specified a use for this floor, but that floor is above as well, not just the top.
That kind of goes back to what some of our informants said at the Christus Park. Those staircases are pretty narrow. That's not a ramp leading up.
And that's it kind of surprises me, because if I'll show a picture of the Hatfield. what's more typical in those others that we looked at are these wide ramps, very much ADA accessible.
Not sure
and-
that's ADA
and big.
compliant.
I'm surprised that they would, that this is what they would conclude, but maybe they ran out of time, you know. Again, it's a class, so.
I had several questions asked about how long people were expected to stay up on that.
Yeah.
And what would they do? Bathrooms, food, water? I mean, it was all kinds of questions. Would there be storage, caches up there on this to help keep people?
Well, I think, that's interesting. I don't believe, I haven't seen any reference to supplies and for how long. If they're saying we think it'll be 750 people, how many days are they going to be there? I mean, the main tsunami event will be over, the primary event, after a couple days anyway. But that doesn't mean you can just walk down and go someplace. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a big consideration. In the Newport Safe Haven example, they have a couple containers sitting up at the top of the hill, and I can't remember. I think they're just hoping to keep people going for a few days, and that other supplies will. I mean, it gets pretty hard to do it for weeks. But a lot of these don't show that. But that's why I think if that floor is above the level as well, then you have a lot of potential for storage and restrooms and everything else. Yeah, I was going to dispute this, but I think I'll let that go.
No, go ahead.
I think, and they're just students. So, but, yeah, anyway. So a lot of factors. I think it's incredibly complicated engineering. Like Steve said, you got water coming and going. This is after a big earthquake. So you got that, and then a lot of water coming from all directions, containing, as we've seen in Japan, houses and cars, and so
Trees, yeah.
it's a challenge. That's why they're so expensive. This is from the FEMA document. They have very specific guidelines for if you're going to build one of these, this is what you need to do. And this is just they included this, but this is just one of the examples. Foundation's a big issue, obviously. So there has to be a pretty serious geotech activity going on to figure out how deep do you have to go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What'll happen with all that water scouring out the soil? So that's more or less what they're dealing with here. So it's I don't know. So they're I don't like the term outside. What they mean is on top. So inside, I think, is in. I don't know what this means exactly, but I assume that's the capacity. Assembly area, et cetera, et cetera. We cut that one out. That's their school project. Here's their future trip. So apparently they hadn't taken one yet, but they're looking forward to one. And this was just done, I think, just last year. So
January.
Yeah. So this may still be happening, which would be great. Yeah, how much they're going to spend on food. Anyway.
I'm glad people are thinking about it, yeah.
There's a number of articles online about the Hatfield example. I don't know if that shows, but you can see their access is, I mean, it's big enough for vehicles. I mean, it is big, and that's more typical. All the ones I've seen are not, if they have stairs, and they may have those, but that's not the main access. So I think, Steve asked this before, I think the construction is started down here. Do you?
I don't know.
And I think there might be, it seems like I stumbled today when I was looking through, but I just looked and didn't see it, but I think there might be a live cam, showing the progress. But anyway, this is a big deal. This is one of the first kind of real serious, I mean, they caught, as you're all aware, a lot of flack from their science departments. I mean, they have some of the biggest names in all this earthquake, tsunami stuff that there are, saying, what you're doing, what you're building in a, So in a sense, having this vertical evacuation is sort of kind of made it, I think, okay. It still, I think, seems silly to people, but so it is going to be a big project, and there aren't too many of them. Definitely not on this scale. 72,000 square feet. I think the height is to the vertical evacuation, wherever that starts here, is like 47 feet. It's a big, and many millions. I think that's it.
When the scientists start putting turrets and cannons on the top, that's when the locals need to start worrying.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and they you never know. So I think that's it for my bit. Any questions related to any of that? We'll try to get you, or we'll get you a copy of that PowerPoint, but hopefully more useful than that, we'll get the real study
That would be interesting.
where they, just to see how they've stepped through it. And again, no one's, these are, people are looking at vertical evacuation now. 10 years ago, nobody really wanted to talk about it, but I think FEMA and others are realizing there are areas where that's the only option that really makes sense. Whether any area of Lincoln City fits that or not is another question, but.
What's the next thing with the beat the wave analysis? Is that moving forward, or?
Laurel, anyway, the Dogami lady, GIS lady, had done some preliminary work in Cutler, not just Cutler, but some other, I think, just as almost part of their normal activity. But she's started to do some of the work, some kind of quick modeling, just to give us a better sense of what will come. So we've given them input on the type of questions that we hope they'll be able to answer, like how many people will be displaced, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the sort of demographic, quasi-demographic stuff. So they're doing some work. The full-blown beat the wave, I'm still assuming September. We haven't heard that it would be complete, maybe October. We haven't really got a final date on that either, I don't think, but roughly that time frame. And then, I'm assuming there would be presentations both here, obviously, but here and council, but also neighborhoods outreach to talk about this, beat the wave results. It's not super intuitive for a lot of people just to look at those maps and kind of make sense of them. So I mean, I think you'd want to package it with, here's the picture and here are some of the recommendations to make it look better, rather than just throwing the stark maps out there, because they're pretty harsh. Some of them talk about number of fatalities, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you want to be careful how that's presented. So that might not, getting that together may be November or something, if they stay on their schedule. I assume it'll take some time to get the message clear.
Well, thank you, Mark. Any
All right.
further questions? All right. Do we have any new business this evening?
No.
Nope. Any planning commission training? Nope. Reports and comments from staff?
I just want to mention one thing, actually I want to mention two things, but one thing I want to mention related to what Mark just went over, on Saturday, September 15th, there's a public emergency preparation event at the Taft Fire Hall. I don't have the time.
I'm not sure of the time.
The last time they did it, it started sometime in the morning, and they had refreshments and information and such there. This is something for the public. It's being put on by the Fire District and Northwest Natural.
And it's a really great event. I was at the last one.
Yeah.
Very
And
informative.
I think as far as the timing, my memory, and I didn't look at this time, is like 9 to mid-afternoon or something. And I know typically there are hot dogs or something.
My understanding, yeah.
Well, there are a lot of displays from companies that are producing materials that you'll need during an emergency, and, you know, a lot of information on how to get them and how to purchase them, and it's really a good thing, yeah.
Good. The other thing I want to mention is you see on the screen related to the design standards, the project that we're working on Tuesday, the 28th, which is a week from today. At 12:30, there'll be a presentation by our consultant on at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon on the project, and then and this is at the community center, is where the Chamber of Commerce luncheon will be. And then after that, the same site, from 1 to 3, there's a visual preference survey where people will be shown pictures of various buildings, and they'll have clickers to say yay or nay about them. So trying to get community information on that.
Oh, can I add to that? If you're interested in attending the luncheon, you should let the chamber know right away. They like to have about a week's notice. And Miles, you're a member of the chamber, aren't you? And you're supposed to let them know a week in advance if you want to have lunch. And I think the luncheon is maybe $13, something like that. But you don't have to have given notice or pay for the luncheon. You can just come at 12:30 and listen to the presentation and then stay for the preference survey.
And that, just to make clear, that's if you don't eat, you don't have to pay.
Right, yeah, that's right. And the other thing about that is, Kate, we're going to give notice in case more than 4 of you come. We'll have to make sure that we advertise it as a potential planning commission meeting. Okay.
Okay. And then on Thursday, September 20th, we're going to have an open house from 12 to 2 at the Historical Museum down in Taft. Followed the same evening by a second one, 5 to 7 at the Cultural Center. So we're trying to have something at both ends of town, talk about the design standards, the project, and what people's preferences are, where they want to see it go.
At 2:30, we'll be at the high school talking to the leadership class, and that's not open to the public, so we didn't put it on our poster, but that should also be an interesting event. And also, we are going to try to fit in some interviews with particular people during the day, give our consultants a chance to talk to specific people maybe who are in the in business or in construction, design, and if you have any ideas about somebody you think would be really good for the consultants to talk to individually, let us know, and we'll try to work a couple people in during the off times.
I just want to emphasize again, these are all public events. We really want people to show up. We really want to hear from people, so I encourage everybody to show up. Like on September 20th, we have one during the day and one during the evening. So if it's not convenient during the day, we'll have the evening open, and if it's not convenient during the evening, we've got during the day.
How are you advertising this?
We just did.
Well, to,
Um,
to a select few.
Actually, I know that tomorrow morning, it should be mentioned on the radio, and
What else have we done, Kate?
What else have we done? It's on the website. We sent it to all the media outlets, to the Design Standards Project Advisory Committee with the hope that they'll share it with their groups.
We took posters around to several locations.
So we-
And if
it'll be
you would
shared.
like a poster to put somewhere where you think it will be noticed, let me know. You all, we could just send, would you like us to print some and have you pick them up, or would you like us to send you the PDF and you can print your own?
I'd like a printed copy, and I'll use it for our Nelscott Neighborhood Association meeting coming up this coming weekend.
Oh, great, and you can send it out, I'll also send it to you electronically, and you can send it around with your meeting notice or whatever. So.
Then I have a question for Kate. When do you need to hear from us as to whether we're going to the luncheon or not?
If you're going to the luncheon, I think you make reservations with the chamber.
Right, but I mean in
itself.
terms of how many are
Oh,
for the public
I
notice.
think what we'll do is we'll just do our general notice, and just in the event that there are a quorum present.
Okay, thank you.
Deb, when can I pick up a poster?
I can make some, do you just want one? We'll make a few and have them sitting on the table right at our office, and you can pick them up and take
Great,
them
thank
with you
you.
tomorrow.
Any more comments from staff?
No.
Any questions from the commissioners?
I'd like to ask a follow-up question. I assume that this is the start of creating design standards? Is that?
that's right, commercial and multifamily.
We already
Yeah,
have
right.
a lot of standards.
Now,
This is a look at what we could do better.
All right, any further comments from commissioners? Yes.
I noticed we're going to be having a meeting on signage. We're going to be changing the ordinance, and I just wondered, do we have a date
We
set out for that now?
don't have
or
that
is
scheduled yet. There is a draft of the revised sign ordinance on the city's website, and we've met with Chamber of Commerce about that, or the Chamber of Commerce's Government Affairs Committee and so on, trying to get input on that. And there will be hearings that we'll let everybody know about at both the Planning Commission and the City Council. But again, we don't have that scheduled yet.
Just something to keep into consideration. I read a news article today about signage that is happening with projectors, and we might want to make sure that we cover that bridge. Evidently, they can be pretty racist in content, and you have to, well, anyway, it's the subject we should kind of review when we
Yeah,
do the
okay.
signage.
Projecting onto buildings, or?
Projecting onto buildings, notices, events, political comments, just any sorts of different information. Evidently, there's a new technique they use for
Yeah.
projecting.
It's basically like a big slide projector. I know I've seen pictures of them on, there's somebody protesting, they put it on the Trump Hotel in Washington DC, they projected on the side of that kind of thing. So,
Thanks for that tip, yeah. And then in regards to our next meeting on the 4th,
next,
do we know what's on the agenda for that?
yes, we have two things on the agenda. A hearing on the final master plan for the Lincoln Palisades Phase 4. You did approve the preliminary master plan, and the final master plan is just, the real issue there is it essentially the same as the preliminary that you approved? And there also, then we will have the Imagine Lincoln City vision statement for your review and to make a recommendation to the city council.
That's right after Labor Day, so that's,
Right.
we're all going to be here, I hope? Yeah. Good. All right, anything else? I don't think so. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.